Hi there, everybody. This is Tracy, and I am here today with Rachel Grant from Rachel Grant Coaching. And Rachel is a sexual abuse recovery coach. And I know that a lot of us have had this feeling that we have been sexually abused or actually have been. So I brought Rachel in to talk to us today about it. So welcome and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Would you like to start off by maybe just telling us how you got started in this career?
Yeah, well, it's been a wiggly journey, to be sure, finding my way here to doing this work with survivors of sexual abuse who are really at that point of feeling kind of sick and tired of, feeling broken and unfixable and just, going through the paces of life, but not really, living life. And in my journey, which, if we go really back to the very beginning, I was sexually abused by my grandfather when I was 10 years old. It's likely that he abused me before that age, but my most clear, distinct memory is at the age of 10. So that's really kind of where I usually mark it.
Mm-hmm.
And like many survivors of sexual abuse or trauma, I went through many of the very normal, usual responses of feeling scared, unsure, blaming myself, thinking that I had done something, to cause all of this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, my parents discovered, what had been going on, and they were great. They immediately got my grandfather out of the house and supported me. But really, Tracy, I just wanted to try to pretend that none of it had happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, again, a very common, normal thing for survivors of abuse. I pushed it all away, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine. It's no big deal. Let's just all get on with things.
Mm-hmm.
But, that trauma was really showing up in my life in all sorts of ways through my teen years and through my 20s. I struggled with how I felt about myself. I struggled certainly in relationships and found myself in, abusive relationships and having a very hard time with, setting boundaries and trusting and all of those things. So eventually I decided, okay, I better take a look at this. I better get some support. And I did. And kind of went some of the traditional routes, like therapy and doing groups, and all of that was really great. But I noticed at a certain point that I was starting to get really frustrated because I felt like I was going into these environments and continuing to talk about the abuse or trauma or the things that I was struggling with in my life. But every time I would turn to the guide, the person who I had hired to support me, and asked, okay, so what do I do about this? How do I actually change this? How do I
Mm-hmm.
get out of this?
Right.
I was so shocked at the number of times that I got either back, I'm not really sure, or well, what do you think you should do?
Oh, I hate that one.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in about my mid-20s, I just said, okay, enough of that. There has to be a better way. There has to be a better answer. And that's what really propelled me forward. So eventually I did my master's in counseling psychology, and I became really fascinated with neuroscience. I really wanted to understand how the brain is impacted by trauma and how we can use that information to actually heal. And
Wow.
so, fast forward now 10 years, I've been working with clients and taking them through my Beyond Surviving program, which really at the end of the day is just everything that I used to get my shit together, right? Just first I had to take care of me. And thank goodness that the work translates and carries over. So now I work with people by phone and Skype all over the country, all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
supporting them in that same journey.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And I know so many people because I work with the Domestic Violence Coalition of Colorado. That's a very common thing that is discussed at all of our meetings. And it's a very painful thing to address. And I think for me, I know that when my sister was 9, we were all sent away to these people's house for a summer. And my sister, who was 9, came back and told my parents that she was abused by this person. And my mother's, was like, you're making it up. bullshit. She totally did not validate her or get her any help.
Yeah.
And I think it has completely changed her entire life. I mean, that kind of abuse to begin with is one thing. We did have a narcissistic mother, so that didn't help things, but
Yep.
just the non-believing and the non just support that she should have gotten. And
yeah.
I find, and maybe you can elaborate this, is she's 62 years old now, and she is almost like her mind is trapped as a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old. She can't function. Is that common?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times what happens as a result of trauma and abuse is that there are parts of ourselves that become a little bit stagnant. And it's like they almost stop maturing. And one of the main reasons why that happens is because all of our survival skills, all of our attention gets sent towards like managing something that's really big that you don't have the capacity to manage as a child.
Right.
And so I remember there was a time in my maybe mid-20s where I was having an argument with my boyfriend, who was soon to be my husband. He was a narcissist, fell into that trap too. But, we were having this heated discussion. But I had this moment, Tracy, of almost like seeing myself as like, wow, I'm actually handling this very much like a 10-year-old or a teenager. Like I'm literally like stomping my feet, almost like having a temper tantrum. And sometimes I really did have a temper tantrum. I think I really did. Like I throw myself down on the ground. It was not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
And, he's trying to relate to me as somebody who is a 20-something. And I just began to notice, man, I missed some skills. I missed some development because of the trauma. There's this great book that is called How to Grow Up When You're Already Grown Up.
Oh, okay.
And it really is all about this phenomenon and having like parts of ourselves stunted, because at the same time, like emotionally, how I handled situations was like that. But I also held down a full-time job and was really, successful, managed things and could, run a household. So I think a lot of times for us survivors, it's like this dichotomy where we feel like we're completely falling apart in one area of our lives sometimes and not able to cope or manage or handle it. But then we'll also have really strong strengths in other areas. And I think for people who are interacting with us, that can be really just jarring. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is. So what your sister is experiencing is normal. But the good news, Tracy, is that we can learn those skills. Like we can kind of grow ourselves up or parent ourselves. And, I had to learn emotional stability. I had to learn how to communicate, these sorts of things. So,
boundaries probably.
Big.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing. I had no idea about a boundary, and it sounds so crazy, but when you're raised in an abusive sort of household, they're not going to teach you skills to make you better, because it's better if you're under their control, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I know that so many of the survivors that I talk with, go through that and have to learn boundaries.
Yeah.
So when someone comes to work with you, what does recovery look like?
Well, I talk about the journey of recovery as being about a couple of different things. So the first thing is it is about resolving the trauma from the past, like really getting complete about that and shifting the way that we're relating to the past and how that past is influencing our current sense of self, right?
Okay.
So some of the key goals in healing from sexual trauma are overcoming shame. Right? That's such a huge piece of it. I made this happen. There's something I did to cause this. And we can't really live healthy, whole lives if we're stuck in shame, because it blocks us from being able to connect to our own needs and desires, right? Communicate those needs and desires, and even just feel deserving, right, of anything good and wonderful. And if you don't feel any of that, you're not going to, go out and build relationships. You're not going to start a career. You're not going to pursue things that you love, right?
Right.
On a neurological level, it's all about healing the brain, like really treating the brain as an injured part of ourselves that we need to heal. And so, one thing that I work very specifically with my clients around are the tools that help us do that, right? Fix that neurological wiring that's gone all wonky and, askew because of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other piece of it is kind of what we've just been talking about. Life keeps happening. I've not yet figured out a way to just make everyone's life, easy for the rest of their lives. A new challenge comes up, right?
We're going to have triggers forever. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what we can do, though, is decrease how susceptible we are to triggers,
Mm-hmm.
how on the, how almost like hair trigger it is, right?
Right.
And we can decrease that so that the likelihood that we'll get triggered goes way, 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 way down.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of it is just knowing that we're really well equipped. So if something does happen in our lives or we do get triggered, that the duration of the impact of that trigger gets decreased, right? So rather than feeling like, oh gosh, this is now taken over and I've just spent a week like in a trauma spiral, essentially, I was able to like recognize what was happening, recover, reset within, a matter of minutes.
That's really helpful because I know that those spirals and, even the holidays, it could be the anniversary of being sexually abused, being raped, whatever it is, it's going to be a trigger. It might even be the way someone smells, and sometimes they might have worn a certain kind of sunglasses when you were sexually abused. And that every time you see that, you're just like, so right. We have to learn those tools. I think it's the most important part of the healing that people just don't get. Today in this Me Too kind of Harvey Weinstein, every other day someone else is being accused. For me, the most horrific part is the non-believing of the victims.
Yeah.
And actually the abuse. If we look at some of them that are on the Ray Moore scale, they're being, bomb threats and people outside their houses, and it is becoming politicized when nobody's believing them. And it was really hard for them to come out. So do you think that this Me Too campaign and just, this is a wave we've never seen before?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And how do you think that is going to help, I want to call it the cause, or help victims?
Yeah. Yeah.
Will it help them?
I hope so. I really do. I think that certainly in my lifetime, we're seeing a level of frustration, and I've had enough, and I'm not going to be silenced anymore, like hitting a decibel that we have never seen before.
Yeah.
And more people being willing to say, yes, this happened to me. It is happening to me. And here are the people who have done it. Not just, a lot of times people have broken the silence, but not named who, right? So now we're getting both of those. And, I think I was just talking about this with my girlfriends the other night, and I was saying, I think when it comes to social change, what we notice is that it is like a pendulum. So we've been on this end of the spectrum for a very long time where it's like, shut up, don't talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm feeling that swing where we're hitting this other end of the pendulum where it's like, okay, we're just going to let loose, and it's just out. And eventually, I think there is a middle that will be the healthiest and most powerful place for survivors of trauma, which is a tricky place because it is about, and I want to be careful with my words here, but it is about due process for the person who's been accused, but also giving the victims due process as well by not treating their claims as, something to be dismissed or shoved off or, whatever it's been historically, right?
Yeah. And I think also we need to not just talk about it, but give people the tools to heal. Now that people are coming out, it should be something that our insurance companies can cover coaching from someone like you, because so many therapists are just, particularly on the narcissistic scale that I work in here, they don't know what they're talking about, and
Yeah.
they mess people up even further. And to me, helping them find the answers is a big part of it. And I know that a lot of people will work with like a coalition against domestic violence. They will work with rape crisis centers, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting the right help.
Yeah.
And if someone comes to you and you've got these coaching programs and things like that, what can they expect for treatment? Now, like, how long was the question that was coming out my mouth, but it didn't come out. I'm like, you can't say how long it is going to be, because of course everyone's different in different stages. And, on the narcissistic scale, we get people that are just learning about it.
Yeah.
And then we get people that are tired of learning and hearing the same thing over and go, how do I get better now? And I'm sure that you have that same scale.
I do.
So
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that's really developed in my work over the last 10 years is thinking about healing as a 3-stage process.
okay.
And it's not necessarily linear, like you might be in one place in one part or one area of your life and a little further along. But generally, survivors are going to go through these 3 stages. They're going to start out in the victim stage, where they're either still being traumatized or they're in the denial place, right? I don't, like where I was describing I was in my teens, right? Like, oh, I want to like just pretend none of this happened. I want to just go on with my life. It's no big deal. And the bridge, the thing that has to happen in order for someone to move from that victim stage into the survivor stage is acknowledgement.
Right.
So once a person's able to do that and acknowledge, yeah, you know what, this did happen to me, it's impacted my life, then they're in that survivor stage, which is really all about understanding the impact of the abuse and making those connections and beginning to recognize that a lot of what you're doing is a result of trauma. It's not a part of who you are. It's not because, this is you and you're stuck this way. But then eventually people hopefully hit that place where they do start to go, okay, great. Well, so what do I do about this? How do I change? How do I transform? And so most of the people who come to me are going to be ready to bridge that gap. They're really ready to move. They've done a lot of that healing work. And if they haven't, then I have great resources and network and, referrals for them. So once they're ready to commit to the Beyond Surviving journey, what that looks like is working with me one-on-one for either 8 months or working with me in a group program that's 4 months. So people are sometimes surprised. They're like, really? Like 8 months? That's it? Like, is it? And I think I've had clients say like, man, I've been in, therapy for 25 years and in the 8 months. And I think the reason why the changes happen the way that they do in the Beyond Surviving program is one, because they're at a particular stage of healing, right? They've done a lot of the heavy lifting.
Right.
But also because every single piece of this program is, okay, so you struggle with trust. Let's look at why that is, but only for a short time, because what we really want to put our attention on is, how do you trust? What are you going to do about that? And because it is so skills-based, so action-oriented, getting in there and identifying where they're stuck and blocked, but then immediately, okay, here's what you can try. Here's a skill or a tool. Go out and practice that. And then having that support and accountability, I think that just all adds up to them being able to make, really great changes. I've had people, Tracy, come into my world who have said, I've never had a relationship. I don't think I can ever have a relationship. And, now they're married with children.
Yay!
Man, I'd really love to do this with my life, but I'm so full of self-doubt. I'm so lacking confidence that and then have graduated and gone on to start their own businesses. Right? And, for me, that is the heart and soul of the work that I do. It's really about opening the doorway. I often tell my clients, like, all this really is about at the end of the day is you getting to be the person who is supposed to be here before any of that bullshit happened to you, right?
Yeah.
And go live your life, right? So that you're no longer defined by the abuse, independent of the fact that you went through trauma or abuse.
Yeah.
You have, the life that you really want to have.
Yeah. And not holding on to that identity of victim. Because no matter what the abuse is, it's it's part of your identity, but it's not part of who you are.
Right.
And that's the separation where you have to say, okay, this happened to me and it doesn't define me. For me, I don't know, you probably not have watched my videos, but I was arrested by my narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was telling people this Saturday night, I didn't leave my house for 6 months. I was so traumatized. I was so afraid. I was just, just in a cave trying to understand what the hell just happened.
Yeah.
And then when I finally came out and made a video, I'd already started making videos, but I didn't admit that part. And when I finally had the courage to do that, it not only changed my life, but it really changed so many people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
I got an email just this morning from someone in Canada. She was like, I thought I was the only one in the world. Thank you for making me feel this way. And I think that's the same thing that your people would experience when they're like, it's a eureka. It's happened, but it's not me. And it's changing the story too, because we tell ourselves and we throw that out there so easily, boom, 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 this is what happened to me. And we hold on to that.
Yeah.
And that's what the painful part is for people, is to understand how do you untangle that out of the deep pores of your brain.
Yeah, I love that. For me, it's really about, I never believed that this was a possibility when I was a teenager and when I was in my 20s. If somebody had told me this at that stage of my journey, I would have been like, you're full of it. Mm-hmm. Right. But really, like for me,
mm-hmm.
when I say I was sexually abused, it has the same charge or energy as I went for a walk this morning.
Right.
Right. Or I grew up in Oklahoma. Or I went to the University of Chicago. Like, they're all elements of my life. They're all parts of things that I've experienced, things that, I've gone through. But when we're in the midst of the trauma, right, when it still really got its claws in us, this I was abused piece is like everything. It's the overarching thing.
Right.
And that's okay if that's where you're at, because that is a part of the journey. But what I hope to, encourage people around is that is not the end of the journey, right? There's something beyond that, right? There's something next.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing special about me or my clients that made it possible for us to get there. It's really just a matter of education, I think, awareness, and just digging in a little bit to look at how can I address this from the perspective of what's the solution, what's the antidote, if you will, to these things that I'm struggling with.
Right. And rewiring the brain and getting those tools.
Exactly.
I teach people lots of tools
Yep.
within our abuse world. And I was 57 years old before I knew what the hell a boundary was.
Right.
But
you learn at one point, and that's so key. Like, it's never too late.
Yeah.
When you learn, and that's great.
Yeah. And you can see things more clearly too.
Yeah.
Once you've got those tools, you see that you've been holding on to the victimhood and the pain, and you don't have to. You don't have to have it in your toolbox to walk down the street. So I have another important question for you. How does someone help a friend? When someone has had this happen, it is a horrible, horrific thing. But friends often, especially even in the narcissist world, they don't know what to say. They don't know how to help us. And very often, because of that fear, they abandon the victim from their friends or from their family. So how can someone that says, I really want to help my sister, my friend, how can they help?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll offer is just two resources. So the 3 stages of recovery that I was talking about earlier, there's a free checklist that is great for survivors to be able to understand and identify where they are in the journey and what types of support they need based on that, and the goals of healing for those stages. So that's the first thing that I always recommend that survivors and advocates download. Which is available at rachelgrantcoaching.com/checklist. So the reason why that's a great resource is because we want to try to match what the person needs with what we're offering.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone has just for the first time acknowledged, okay, this is what happened, this is where I'm at, to
Mm-hmm.
go racing towards, okay, well, let's get you this resource and let's teach you this and let's do, like, all of that is just too much, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, so understanding and being able to help them even identify where they are in that healing process is a great way, first of all, to advocate.
Mm-hmm.
The second resource is at rachelgrantcoaching.com/resources. And you'll find there in that list of many, many topics, one for advocates. And
Okay.
so there are great books and websites and other things, other tools there that, I think being educated is one of the first things, to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay.
Above and beyond that, the last thing I'll say on that is ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's really like being from a place of curiosity. How can I support you today? What would be most helpful? Is
Mm-hmm.
there anything you need today? Right? Just staying in that place of like, I'm here, I'm available, right?
Right.
And one of the beautiful things about that is you're also helping that person begin to build those muscles that they need of advocating for themselves, which is
Mm-hmm.
a huge part of that healing journey too.
And it shows them trust, because when we have friends and family that turn away and walk away because they don't know what to say, it re-victimizes the victim and they feel like they've done something wrong and the shame starts to come in. So I think as a friend or family member, just, do what you can, bring them soup or just be there for them. Even if they aren't asking, know that they're probably in a place that they would receive and at least feel less alone, because
Yeah.
that's the hardest part, is feeling that you're abandoned by the rest of the world while you're dealing with normal abandonment crap. All of a sudden something happened to you and nobody wants to talk to you, and that hurts even more, I think.
For sure. And I think an important thing to just know and understand is that survivors of abuse and trauma are usually not very good at asking for support. So a lot of times people will say, well, I'll just wait until that person asks. I don't want to be pushy. I don't want to be insistent. I'll just wait until they ask, me for something. But you're going to be waiting a long time probably because most survivors of abuse, again, because of that shame piece, right?
Yeah.
I don't deserve any support. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to cause anybody trouble. And, that's really one of the first things that we look at in the Beyond Surviving program, because yes, it's important for our family and our spouses and friends to be educated and learn how to support us. But I also think it's very, very important for survivors to learn how to make requests, how to ask for support, how to let people know what they need. And so if we can get those two things happening, yeah, it really comes together to make a big difference.
Wow. Well, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to put a link to your website down below in the comments, and we'll put a link across there so people can reach you.
Okay.
And I really appreciate the work that you're doing, because it's not that common. And I think that people really need to understand that there is hope and there is something that they can do. So thank you for all your hard work and taking the time today to talk with me and help some of our people on my channel. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me and creating this opportunity to talk about this subject. Super important. I appreciate that. And to all of you who are watching and listening, I just want you to know that my biggest hope for you is that you just be encouraged today. And, I hope a little something from our conversation today has touched something. And if I can be of any support to you at all, just let me know. I'm here.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.